Welcome, everyone. I know you have interesting table neighbors. I'm sorry to take away your attention for a moment. It will be very interactive, and you will have a lot of opportunities to discuss with everyone who is sitting at your table and beyond. But first of all, welcome. In the name of, obviously, IMD, which is me, David is here as well, a big team, Adrian, WWF, Thomas is here, we have Aurélie, the entire team that really supported us, and of course, Intent, where we collaboratively set up this event. And why this session, why this 2-hour discussion on nature in business is that we had this shared feeling that we're coming from a time where there were a lot of good intentions around nature in business, to a lot of, let's say, political pushback, to a lot of AI being more of a priority, maybe disconnecting us even further from nature, to really say, how can we make nature real in business? How can we elevate the discussion so that it's not a side discussion, a nice to have, or optional, but that it really actually forms an integral part of how business do their work. So this is the purpose of today's session. You've seen already the deep dives. Even if you're now very afraid of missing out something, don't worry. I'll tell you briefly how it works. After a brief panel discussion, we will basically have you at your tables discussing these topics, and you always have an expert at your table, whom I will introduce later on. And we only do that for 20 minutes, and then you have the opportunity to change the table to be exposed to further perspectives. So even if you have big FOMO right now, don't worry. You have a chance to switch the table later on. Now, with no further ado, let me introduce our host of today, which is André Hoffmann. I'm not sure how much I need to say in terms of introduction. I'll still give it a try. I think what is worth mentioning is that André is now also the co-chair of the World Economic Forum, so which is not irrelevant for the event taking place right now. As a blue badge this year. He's also vice chair of Roche. I think this is a very long-standing responsibility of his 20 years now. He has been also associated with the WWF for many years, 10 years as the vice president, and has been a massive advocate for the role of nature in business, not least with his book, New Nature in Business, which is something that really is trying to elevate the discussion exactly to sea level and maybe beyond. André, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Albert. It's really exciting to see so many people here today, because, as you very rightly said, Julia, in your introduction, nature is not as trendy, as popular as it was when we met last year. There's been a bit of a in German we say ein Gegenwind. There's been a bit of an adverse wind, and we need to do something about that. So you can see here in a nutshell what it is that you're going to discuss today. Maybe I just make a very general introduction to why does nature matter for business. You know, the traditional view of business is the thing we've all been taught at business school, not of course at IMD, but at all other business schools. You know, we are in business to provide prosperity by making money. And making money means managing the assets that are available to create a margin which can then be redistributed. But of course, that ignores one thing, is that nature, which is the underlying asset of all the assets on the planet, is not given the right proportion. And so that's why you need to look at how you're going to put nature on the balance sheet. Because nature is not inexhaustible, and it's not for free. And if we include it into the value creation process, we need to be in a position where we can recognize that you manage what you measure. And we all know that, we've all practice it in our daily life. So the real question is, how do you break that logic which equates success with increase in shareholder value in business in general, and I think probably also in society? So how do we reconcile this value creation mechanism, which we all need? I mean, we need growth, we need prosperity, we need shared prosperity, and we also need sustainability in the prosperity model. So if you really want to be sustainable in that prosperity world, we need to think differently about nature. So Julia very kindly mentioned the fact that I am now the co-chair of the World Economic Forum. It's interim co-chair, but I'm not sure how long an interim is, just to say that once, you know. So we have given ourselves five strategic imperatives, and that's new. We didn't do that in this way before. The first imperative is that, you know, we need to look at growth, because businesses in general will need to grow in order to outlive the incredible burden of debt that we have accumulated over the years. So we need to look at that in its specificity. We also need to look at geopolitics, of course. And we just come back, Rosalie and I, from a meeting of the American delegation here in Davos. It's interesting. I mean, I think you can ask Rosalie when she will tell you more than I can. The third thing we need to look at, of course, is innovation. You know, AI is going to change the planet, and this AI is something we need to sort of put into our strategic imperative, especially if we then translate it to the fourth priority, which is people. You know, what impact on the workplace, on humanity, will this new technology have? But, and that's really the point I wanted to emphasize, the fifth point that we really need to concentrate on is planetary boundaries. How are we going to create resilient, sustainable growth within planetary boundary thanks to innovation? In a nutshell, if somebody asks you when you go home, what did you talk about at Davos, you say exactly that, okay? Because that's what we want you to remember. And yeah, this seminar today, I don't know, do you call it seminar, workshop, whatever it is going to help us to sort of go a little bit deeper into these five priorities. And indeed, I think it's about time for me to say thank you for all of you to be here and to give the microphone back to Julia. I hope I haven't forgotten too many things, but it's a real, so maybe I should also say a word on behalf of Rosalie, my wife, and I, creating this intent with the formidable team we have put in place over the years is really helping us to sort of identify how we can drive outcomes which are going to make a difference. We've spent far too long talking about this. Now it's enough talk. Let's really get into it. And this is what we want to do with this working things. So sorry if you are a little bit squeezed, but the idea is that we want to squeeze you, dare I say, like an orange, so that we can take a little bit of the juice out of here and go and bring it somewhere else. So thank you very much, and Julia, thank you for having me here.
And a big thank you from our side for creating the space, which I think is very important. If you look at the lineup here at Inten, almost all the topics revolve also around, in some way or the other, the fifth dimension, which is around the planetary boundaries and for creating the space for people to meet and to really push the conversation forward. Now, I have the big pleasure to welcome our first panel to stage. Let me start with Thomas Vellacott, CEO of WWF since 2012. Before that, a long business career as well, McKinsey, Citibank, so really combining the two worlds of deep conservation expertise, but also strong knowledge of business and how to really implement in business. And I think this is one of the topics that I think really elevated WWF also to bring that topic much closer to the business reality. And obviously he has a very strong business acumen because he's a proud IMD alumni as well. Thank you so much for joining. Wherever you want, Thomas. Next one is Alfonso Darella. He is vice chairman of Cobega and holds a number of directorships in the Coca-Cola system as well. So he will tell us much more about the business reality. He has a number of directorships and chair position outside that outside of Cobega and Coca-Cola as well. For instance, in the family business network, so he really speaks also the language of family businesses very well. We're delighted to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, Alfonso. And last but not least, my boss, the president of IMD, David Bach, who is also the Nestle chair or Nestle professor for strategy and political economy, which I think is a very important conversation that we're having right now. So we are very glad that he could take the time. He joined us from Yale a couple of years ago, and he is a big advocate of our nature and sustainability agenda. Thank you so much for joining. Let me actually start. Thomas, I said it's not important, but could you sit here? Now it's important. Thank you. So let me start off the conversation, because we wanted to do a little bit of setting the stage before we deep dive then in the conversations at the tables. And one of the reports that just came out, which is a World Economic Forum report that many of you will have seen, is the annual Global Risk Report. And one of the striking findings there that I also discussed with our MBAs is this very interesting 2-year versus 10-year perspective. If we look at what are the most perceived global risks on a 10-year perspective, nature tops almost all the other topics. These are in the top 10, it's like 6, 7 topics. It's just around nature. So nature risks are real. Nature is a big, big topic, and yet when you look at the 2-year perspective, we see AI, we see obviously geopolitical confrontation, a lot of economic insecurities, and so on. So now if you do the comparison, 10 years ago, nature was also seen as a 10-year risk. It was never actually a 2-year risk. So my first question to the panelists, and maybe we'll start with you, Alfonso, is really this question, how do we make it a priority now? Because we know that if we continue to delay, we will actually lose much more. Nature is suffering already now, not only in 10 years. So how do we manage to make this future risk actually a board priority or a CEO priority now?
Yes, hello, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think I come from it started 70 years ago, very small company, family business in Barcelona. Now we are reference shareholder of the largest bottler of Coca-Cola worldwide, with more than 50,000 people working for us, and in the 3 continents, in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe. So I've been also chair of CSR for Europe, for the brand, 7 years ago. So I started with all this movement, I would say, how things were changing. We have to be optimistic. I don't want to build on drama. I think we have to build on progress. So one of the things I've seen is that when you're a small company, your priority is always consumer preference, and it's also really return on investment. So no manager of a small company will give a priority if the consumer doesn't want or prefer the product or doesn't have a positive or possibly a positive return on investment. They don't have the power, they're not robust enough. And this is one of the things we have to fight for. With the time, we have learned things. At the beginning, we spread the effort in many things: diversity, communities, carbon footprint, all of the things. I mean, waste, water replenishment. And finally, we decided and we saw that the most important thing is to do whatever we knew how to do it. So what we really knew: water. Our product is 95% water. So let's work on water. Since we have concentrated more and more efforts in what we know, we have had a big progress. We replenish 80% of the water we produce now. When we started, we used 3 liters, 4 liters of water for 1 liter of soft drink. Now we use nearly 1.2 liters. We want to go under 1 liter. Worldwide, we want to achieve this 1-to-1, less than 1, for the products we produce. And this is something we know how to do. When we talk about replenishment, we talk also about the stress, about places where stress is so hard that we have to replenish the water at 85%. If not, the plants can't work anymore. So one is to be a supplier, then to be a producer of water, and then to serve water, quality water, to the consumer. So at the end, what we are doing is working on replenishment. And we go much faster that we start working things we don't know, and we have to learn. The second thing, what we know. At the end, what we sell: aluminum, plastic, and water. That's really what you are selling. So let's work on waste. What are we going to do with waste? So we work hardly on waste, and we have targets of 80%. All the products have to be recyclable, 85% recovery, 50% recyclable content. And this is also a target that we can comply, we can do, if the red tape is easy. When we have problems of red tape, DRS is delayed, we have problems to achieve. But I mean, let's work on what we know how to do, how to succeed, how to make progress, and not spread the effort. This is our recommendation I make for everybody.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. And I think what is important here is also to mention the blind spots that many companies still have, right? When you said water, we had 3 times the use. And I think this is something where, how do we then identify these blind spots to really make it business relevant? Because obviously there is a business dimension to this as well.
And we are together with WWF, with you in this project, and EMF also, and you for the plastic project. So we're working together, hand to hand, business to business, organization to organization, in order to get more progress. Not alone.
Thank you. Thomas, maybe over to you, and really this question again: how do we bridge the future and today, which I think is possibly on top of your mind as well in your work with business.
Yes, it certainly is. And I think one approach we sometimes hear is, well, we just have to shout louder because of all these other topics out there. I don't think that gets us there. I think what we need to do is, on the one hand, show the business relevance, you mentioned it, of why are these things directly business relevant? How can we show the kind of risks? We launched something called the biodiversity risk filter and the water risk filter to help companies identify the risks. Because however you feel about sustainability, if you have risks, and you do have risks in your supply chain that you don't know about, that are linked to biodiversity and water, then you ought to know about them. And that's a different kind of case I think we can make. So it's really making the case more based on the business priorities of companies. And it's also to make sure that, I mean, we need to jointly develop solutions. And that's why I think it's so important, like you said, that we work together. We work together along supply chains, we work together across sectors, we work together, business and NGOs. And that we develop solutions which aren't slightly worse than their conventional alternatives, but it's sustainable. So, you know, you'll pay a bit more and it will taste a bit worse. No, we've got to come up with better products, better priced products that are going to win. And we have examples that works. For example, if you bring price parity to plant-based protein products compared to meat-based products, immediately the sales went up. We tested that. You know, it happens, but we need business relevance in terms of the risks, and we need to show that there are better products out there that win on all fronts, including on sustainability.
And I think it's very important what you're saying. One of the, let's say, biggest pushback I get is sustainable products are basically they don't sell. And I think what you're saying is important because oftentimes we have sacrificed performance or price. If these alternatives are 3 times the price or are not performing according to the alternatives, then it's not because of sustainability that they fail, because they violate other very important consumer criteria. And I think this is something that we need to be aware of. It cannot come on cost of purely the consumer or customer in these cases. David, future risk, current board priorities. How do we better get this on top of the agendas?
Yeah, so clearly all of us sense that something has changed in the environment in which many of you in the room are trying to move us to its greater sustainability. I would echo my colleagues and say we should not get discouraged by those headlines. And even what you pointed out, that nature and biodiversity and the climate seem to always be sort of the 10-year risk, but not the current risk. Let us not therefore assume that nothing is happening right now, because a lot is happening right now. I think that risk measure, to some extent, reflects what people think they can get their arms around, and they have a hard time getting their arms around misinformation, geoeconomic confrontation. But so much progress is being made. We need more, it needs to move faster. But I think, as everybody has said, in many ways, one of the good things about the sort of, I want to be very careful here when I say good things. One of the sort of positive side effects of what is happening is that we really now have to focus on the business case, right? You don't score points anymore with analysts or with employees or with journalists by talking about all the great things you're going to do. In fact, it might be quite the opposite. You're only really going to benefit from the things that you are doing. I don't know, Andrew, if I can call on you to hold up the book that is right in front of you to folks. I'll do a little bit of promotion, but only because, it's not my book, only because the topic is so important. And 2 IMD colleagues, Frederick Delsas and Gautam Chalagalo, who've written a book on sustainability strategies that put customers first, right? And it's exactly what you were talking about before. So companies are continuing to work on this. You've published a great article, Julia, on quiet corporate activism around the environment. People are talking about green hushing. So I want to make sure that we remain optimistic about the progress that is being made. And I'll just maybe add one additional thing, which is so many products or the value proposition of them is multidimensional. And those of us in the room who care passionately about the planet, about nature, have often emphasized the sustainability side, but there are other ways that you can pitch a product. And an example that I tend to use in this context, we would do a fair amount of work with Vestas, the leading wind turbine manufacturer, and their CEO says, when I pitch wind energy, I talk about security, reliability, affordability, and sustainability, right? Now, sustainability is number 4. I don't think the planet cares if it gets mentioned first or if it gets mentioned fourth. And if you can build more political support by talking about the great thing about renewables is it's local, right? It's predictable, it's reliable, and of course, increasingly, much more affordable than the alternatives. If we have to reframe certain things, if we have to talk about health and well-being as opposed to the planet, if we have to talk about security and reliability in a geopolitically challenged environment as opposed to just biodiversity, I think that's okay. And I think a lot of that continues to happen.
Thank you. And I think you're touching upon such an important point, which sometimes I say we're coming out of the feel-good sustainability bubble, whereby everybody agreed, yeah, we're doing something. And we all gave ourselves the illusion of progress and that things are under control. But if you look at the actual progress, it was minimal. So I think what is happening now is we're forced to be much more strategic. We're forced to, if we want to uphold this topic, it needs to actually really, really connect to core business priorities. And this requires reframing. I think one other shortcoming that I've been seeing is if we tell everyone the same story, let's save the planet, but 80% in their roles say, you can care about the planet, I really need to get these numbers right. We need to talk numbers. So I think we as a community will also need to mature and better connect to the business realities to make this topic relevant and to really be much more strategic in our efforts as well. I want to give the three of you one last chance to react on anything that you've heard here in this discussion before I'll actually invite our fire starters to briefly introduce themselves. Anything, final message before we go into the deep dives, where we actually try to touch upon some of the topics that we have collectively identified as being extremely relevant to make the topic much more strategic.
So maybe to pick up on what you were talking about in terms of, the environment is being mentioned less, for example, on calls with analysts. So there is definitely something changing. But as you said, if we look at company numbers signing up to science-based targets and things like that, there's very little indication that companies are actually somehow stopping or going back. And I think what we have is in business is something similar to what we have in the population around the world. We have good data about this that shows that people really want action on the environment, want action on climate, on biodiversity, but they think they're in the minority. So there's a silent majority for more action. And I think that's the same thing in business. And we need to think about how can we give voices, how can we make sure people realize there are actually majorities out there that want more action. And I think that's where things like corporate advocacy comes in. That's where working together across sectors comes in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, the only thing I'll say is I want to pick up on the point that Andre made before about putting nature on the balance sheet and measurements. We kicked off our MBA program last week, and one of the first speakers was Peter Bakker, the CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and he repeated a line that I know several of us feel, which is, the accountants are going to save the world. And I think, a lot of progress has been made, including in forums such as this one, in developing the kind of tools and frameworks to actually track our progress more effectively and to make sure that asset prices reflect nature risk, as you described it, but also the sort of positive value that is being created. So it is important that that sort of technical side of the work, I think, continues to accelerate. And there, the collaboration across business, NGOs and academia is incredibly important.
So you're silently promoting Table 2, putting nature on the balance sheet, where we will be discussing exactly that point much more in depth. Absolutely.
I will say yes or something. I think it's very important, this silence mindset about sustainability. I think sometimes international agreements don't get any positive result. But there's a building sense of improvement on the sustainability principles. And this is a real thing. You can see this in our consumers and the people we meet every day, that we visit every week, sometimes twice a week, that we have this perception from the consumer, from the people. And this sometimes not what is reflected in these huge meetings of players worldwide.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Big hand of applause for our starters here. If I could now ask our fire starters at each of the table to briefly stand up so that we can see who you are. We have table 1 Whom do we have? Table 1, here we go. Erin and Sonia on table 2, table 3. Thomas, great to have you. Table 4, 5. Do we have? Oh, Stephanie and Eva. I'll give you all briefly a mic to introduce yourself in 2 sentences and to say what you're discussing at your table. You now have the chance. If you really feel wrongly placed, you can change. If not, stick through the conversation for about 15 minutes, then you have the opportunity to change and basically go to another table. Let's start with table 1 and Erin.
Great, thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. Erin Billman, Science-Based Targets Network. So very happy to be leading the discussion on measuring targets for nature. Our big question is going to be what experience you have with turning ambition on nature into setting measurable targets, and where did it get difficult?
Thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you. Sonia, from the Land Banking Group, we are focused on getting nature on the balance sheet. And thank you for promoting this. Very much appreciated. The entire idea here is what do we need to do to make a change from understanding nature, thriving ecosystems, healthy landscapes as competitive advantage that we look so deeply for as a business instead of as a liability. And where are the blockers for it, and how can we remove those?
So, welcome everybody. Thomas, at table number 3, we're going to discuss the innovative financing tools. I think it's a matter of capital allocation and how we can direct those capital directly where it may have an impact, and an impact at scale. I think it's very important. We're going to discuss most probably good practices, but also blockers, and to some extent whether there's a magic stick that will help us to move forward. Looking forward.
I'm Jason Ice. I'm leading a table from Renew Earth, which we can talk about separately. I'm here to help manage the conversation at table 4, which will be around leading and communicating on nature strategies. I think the main focus that we're going to try to have is on how can companies better communicate and gain value from positive nature action. How do we think about the greenwashing challenge? What does it look like to turn some of that into some of the good work into resilience in the supply chains and improvement on Earth that gets communicated effectively and compellingly to investors or consumers or what have you. So that's what we're going to do at this table.
So good morning, good afternoon. Don't know what time of day it is. My name is Stephanie Pullings-Hart. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Nestle. I'm not necessarily the expert. I had a co-host that was at my table with me. Nonetheless, we will be focused on building nature resilience in supply chain, which is obviously at the forefront for so many of us as consumers and as providers of goods across. So that will be our provocative discussion. Thank you.
So technology. I'm Eva Riesenhuber. I'm the Global Head of Sustainability at Siemens. Now we're going to take it a bit off-piste. Nature is the best infrastructure we have. It protects and it feeds people all over the planet. Now we haven't invested enough in maintenance and we need some serious acceleration. So we're going to look at AI and technology. How do we accelerate adaptation, restoration, conversation? We're going to share examples and we're going to seek to inspire every one of you how to take it to the next level.
Hello, I'm here to announce that we're just having wrapping up 3 minutes. You're going to have an opportunity to change topics. So as you can tell, there's a lot of people. It's a small room, but we still want to give people an opportunity to change topics. So in about 3 minutes, you can identify another topic and walk over there, or stay at your table if you prefer. Oh. All right, we had planned for 2 rounds of discussions. So I'm here to tell you, if your conversation is going great and you don't want to get up, don't get up. But if you want to get up now and change topics, it won't be rude. Oh, and for those wondering, it is very hot. We tried. The windows are now open, so the temperature should gradually come down. No air conditioning. You don't think you heard me?
No?
Oh, maybe it is.
Test, test. Hello, everyone. You now have the chance to join a different table. We know you have great conversations. Let me get your attention just 1 second. One second of your attention, please. We'll do a quick vote, a very quick vote. Hands up if you would prefer to stay at your table and get a new fire starter at your table. Hand up. All the hands up. Option B is that you all change tables to also have new people to engage with. Option A, you stay at your table and you get a new fire starter and topic. Who prefers that? Option B, you all get up and search for a new table. You remain? Okay, can I ask the fire starters to exchange tables so that we change the conversation, but you remain? Okay. Thank you so much for all your active work in a very hot room. We didn't tell you we're simulating climate change. This is the inaction if we don't get our act together. So can I ask our fire starters in front so that we discuss a little bit across tables? Can I get all our fire starters in front? And can we get more microphones? Aaron, you're free to choose.
I've been in your shoes. I'm trying to be really good.
All right. Thank you. Wherever, yeah. Go. We see how we. Thank you so much. We will just share some microphones. We share mics, right? Fantastic. Thank you so much for all your active discussions. Let me try to get the attention back to the front now to do a little bit of a wrap up so that we learn also across tables, because you only had the chance to listen to two, so that we hear a little bit about key topics, key reflections from our fire starters to just help us just deep dive into the conversations that were held. Erin, would you mind starting us off? What are some of the, let's say, key insights, maybe an idea that inspired you, any reflections from the discussions you had?
Well, somebody at my table said setting targets is not rocket science. And I'm like, can I quote you on that and put it on SCTN's website for everybody? That he said, I'm not saying it's easy, but a few headlines from our conversation is general agreement and support that it's measurable targets that drive CapEx decisions and strategy for companies. And so that's incredibly important in the nature space. And that the content now exists for a company to do the holistic materiality assessment on their impacts and dependencies on nature, and to move on to the target setting and action to do their part. Between TNFD and SBTN and the LEAP and Steps 1 and 2 frameworks, companies can assess their impacts across land, freshwater, oceans, and the biodiversity in it, and then move on to target setting. And we recognize that a few challenges are quickly being overcome, particularly the technological solutions around, for instance, the measurement and tracking on the ground as a place of ripe innovation. And we're seeing year-on-year step change from the World Benchmarking Alliance in terms of board now listing nature as one of their key responsibilities, and the risks associated with nature being something that's higher on the agenda than it was. And so that's a year-on-year change in this space. And the next step is, okay, so what are you doing about it, action-wise and target setting-wise? And that's where I think when we heard from the first panel, that insight around where's the business most prepared and sees the most materiality is a logical place to get started, in the Coca-Cola example being freshwater. And that's something that is supported today. And so a company can do that and set science-based targets for freshwater if that's where they're ready to get started. So notes of encouragement. And then last thing I would say is we've got some board upskilling resources coming with the WEF launch of the Climate and Nature Governance Principles on Thursday. So look out for that document if that would be helpful for upskilling boards on how they can expand the work they're already doing on climate to cover nature as well.
Fantastic, Erin. So I'm taking away, it's not as difficult as many think, and it's better to get started in trying to be very holistic. Let's get started on the targets that matter most for your respective business. Is that fair? Fantastic. Please, over to you, Thomas.
So I think I need to acknowledge one thing. We're not going to have any patent for the magic stick. I disappoint you, I understand. But this being said, no, there was something which came out of the two conversations. That was really about the scalability of the investments and the capital allocation, and the conclusion of that was very much about what I would call getting the impact at scale. And at scale means actually stacking capital. Do not target just nature. What we ended up with was target investments and allocate capital where you have multiple impacts. People, nature, carbon. This is most probably the most impactful way, and I think to me that was an eye-opener and a great learning.
Apologies, I'm still taking notes. Thank you so much, Thomas.
Pleasure.
Any surprising insight where you said this was somehow counterintuitive?
Well, to me, there was a surprise indeed. Most of the cases when we discussed the investment, it was very much connected to the early stages in companies, either through philanthropy, donation in the end, to get those small businesses growing, or at least giving them a chance to do something out of their great ideas. Then there was something like in between this and the venture capital or the private equity, a step which is missing, which is really the scale, being able to grow those businesses. But fundamentally, the surprise I got from there is that we're still at the, don't take me wrong, but at the pilot stage. Hard to bring that into the big corporations, okay? It's really about initial investment, innovation, and it's hardly going to be mainstream, meaning that the big corporations, their role is not that. This is the role of the venture capital. This is the role of the investors, hardly from the big corporations. So I think here, to me, that was a surprise that actually we're still at that level and bringing the large asset of corporations playing a big role and therefore getting the impact here again at scale. I think to me that was still a surprise.
So the topic really revolves around scalability, and then really this question, how do we move from a lot of pilot initiatives to actually initiatives that impact the business, the core of the business?
You put it absolutely well, yeah.
Perfect, thank you, Thomas. Jason.
Great. Terrific, so we were focused on leadership and communicating on nature strategies, and I guess the key things that came out to me from the conversation were some positive. I think there was a lot of agreement around the table that nature actually, although complex, is a much easier story to tell in general. People relate to it much more instinctively. Making changes on the nature side are much more relatable than something like carbon and the kind of struggles that we've had scientifically to exactly say what we're talking about. So there's a lot of upside potential in how you can communicate nature leadership effectively. I think the second thing that was really interesting is that on the foundation of all this work that we've done and the TNFD frameworks and other things have done to try to create an understanding of what you can measure, there's quite a lot of stuff to work with in terms of understanding, look, this is what it is robustly that we might want to be able to demonstrate. We've got some consistency and some understanding of what's measurable and reportable, but what we don't have, which I thought was interesting, is really a thought process that goes backwards from to whom and what are we trying to communicate that creates value for the company, and what of all this stuff we have or might measure actually contributes to that. So there was a lot of conversation about, are you communicating to your local stakeholders? Are you communicating to your consumers? Are you communicating to your investors? What do they want to hear and understand? They generally don't need or want the whole framework for every single thing that you might need to report. And that might be important for reporting. It might be good practice for science and a solid foundation. And you want it so that you're not subject to greenwashing accusations, which was an important topic that came up. So you need that basis. But it's insufficient to communicate for positive value. To communicate for positive value, you need to translate that into something that those stakeholders value. And that can often be much simpler. It needs to be much simpler, in fact, and it can be much more straightforward. And we're actually, I think, losing as a community quite a lot in not having worked through that translation to value. So that was, I think, in a sort of a broad terms, I think what came out of a lot of our conversation.
Fantastic reflection. I think one of the things I still see is we communicate everything we ever did on whatever nature-related topic, and then making it very difficult for our key stakeholders to understand what exactly you're doing, where you're making a difference. I sometimes say in marketing we talk about USP, and we need to talk about a USSP, right? So our unique sustainability selling proposition. We will not be perceived by our stakeholders on all these dimensions. And I think this is really about going back to what you mentioned with what are the most material topics. What do we really want to be known for? What is it that really stands out where we're maybe ahead of the curve rather than, let's say, at par with our peers? So I think it's so important to say, do not over-communicate either, right? So communicate, but don't do the over-communication. Be much more strategic in what are the messages you really want to land.
And don't treat it as an afterthought. I think a lot of the problem is you do all this work and you think, oh, we have to kind of communicate it, so what can we say?
Yeah.
No, it's quite the reverse. The communication is where you're realizing most or much of the value. Yeah. So what is important to those stakeholders for whom you're getting that value? And start from there, I think, which is often just not the case. It is. By the way, there's some great examples of folks and companies that were doing that, so I don't want to... Yeah.
No, and I think we see that now this is maturing as well, but I think it's an important reminder to say, know your target audience, right? It's not one message fits your local community, your supplier community, your consumers, your investors. Know your target audience and provide them with the key messages that they really need to know. Thank you for that reminder. Eva.
So my topic was AI technology business models for nature. And first of all, I had 2 fantastic roundtables, and can I just say the people in the room are just amazing. So great discussions. Now, Julia, you gave us a frame. You were talking about like 3 categories. It's like AI technology to see better, more data, to be better, and to scale better. And I think we had fantastic examples when it came to see better. Like we had AI and technology to have satellite image to determine the biodiversity health, to look at ecosystem voices, the noises of nature, filter through all the data and determine the health of that ecosystem, or DNA testing of water to see the traces of flora and fauna. So all of those were really nice examples on see better. When it came to act better, there were some examples about supply chains, the traceability in supply chains. Cotton was an example that was mentioned, the water usage around cotton. So I think people agreed a lot of potential, but more data, more visibility. Now you probably touched on that as well. This will really help. Now, scaling is tricky. I actually would put my 2 Siemens example there. So we have very simple automation for rainforests, like global communities in the rainforest, that helps them produce the way they traditionally produce by preserving the rainforest, living in harmony, but having traceability, more yield, more safety that allows them to be a partner to larger companies. And that can be scaled to local communities in more than 50 rainforest nations. Or the work we're doing with the Australian Institute for Marine Science on coral reefs. They now, with our technology, have 10 years of data to determine the stress on the reef, pollution, acidity, salination, temperature. They identified the corals that are most resilient, and they're trying to find a way to extend the reefs beyond the tipping points to buy us time for the overshoot. We won't save all the biodiversity of the reefs, that's a given, but they try to save as much as possible for restoration. And with 200 reef nations in the world, these insights, they want to share more, they want to accelerate, they exported their reef spawner system to the Maldives. We need to find ways to scale our business cases for sustainability.
Thank you so much, Eva. And I think one of the things that we're seeing when we look at AI, or more broadly tech and sustainability, in most companies, it's very much a separate conversation. I mean, what I see at Siemens, which is also the nature of your business, you're by heart a tech-driven company, you really understand and speak both languages. I think oftentimes what I see is holding us back is, I always say the AI or tech people and the sustainability people meet once a year at the Christmas party. And I think this is what is holding us back as well in kind of advancing and leveraging AI for good, if you want. And I think you also mentioned that we're really advancing quickly and seeing better. There's a lot around traceability and transparency. but does it actually inform better action? And I think this is for some still the missing link. It's great that we see more better and we understand now where we should act, and now it's about the acting part and then the scaling part where few solutions are to date. And I think this is where AI and tech have an unparalleled advantage because nothing scales as much as tech or AI does.
Absolutely, and let's not forget, as companies, we can always choose where to invest for technology for the future. I have an data and AI team in sustainability, and we're choosing to find and identify business cases that allows us to scale with positive impact. It's a choice, and I think we all, the people here in the room, they're in the room because they're making the right choice.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Eva. Stephanie, you had busy people, busy tables, a lot of people that wanted to hear more about supply chain.
We did, and we, like Eva mentioned, we had super enthusiastic and very diverse tables and groups, CFOs, COOs, comms people, experts in various areas, journalists or former journalists, world-renowned ones. But we had some key takeaways, and then I wanted to add on one of the comments on AI, digitization, expand on it a little bit more. Looking at building nature-resistant supply chains, there were like really 6 key takeaways that I could summarize if I had my own co-pilot that was working in my brain at the table. One is we need more of a holistic view, realizing that what resiliency looks like in a specific supply chain could vary. If you're in the mining industry, if you're in the food industry, if you're in the textiles industry, resilience could look a little bit different. So, we need to just look at the whole topic more holistically. The other thing that came out is part of it I kind of drove, but in general, most companies have not walked away from any of their commitments in that space and really are actually leaning more in. They may not be as vocal as they were before, but they're still highly committed to doing what's right for the world and preserving the world and looking forward to our net zero journey. The other aspect was the key members were saying, making future risk or understanding the future risk really is a key priority for the overall viability of different businesses and industries. So that is why there's a need to focus on resiliency. And then the transformation, though, in general, requires a level playing field. So it encourages and requires collaboration with government and policymakers, with different institutions, with businesses. And we talked a little bit about what that could look like, and there's some challenges as well, so that it's not viewed if you have 2 large companies or 3 large companies, i.e. Nestle, a Danone, Unilever, that are talking about climate, but making sure that it's done in a way that it's not perceived from a trade or securities perspective that you're doing anything against or that's not in favor of the consumer, but making sure that that's actually common. And then the last 2 points, digitization being one of them. There are times where we overcomplicate what we're trying to measure, and everybody has their own definition. So it's really how do you drive simplicity so that at the lowest level, be it a farmer or another customer, you're making it easy for them to provide data, but then we're utilizing the same type of data and digitizing that. And then finally, the 6th point that we kind of cover is just the consumer understanding of what it actually even means to be resilient. What is a consumer looking for? And ultimately, regardless of the good or services that you're providing, the consumer may not always know what he or she wants. And so in some cases, we have to fill the void. In other cases, we are actually building on something that maybe they've given us a bit of an inclination to actually do. And I just wanted to build on that last point that the 2 of you made with respect to whether or not kind of like digitization or IT and sustainability operate differently. And we at Nestle have actually been very specific in ensuring that we have a digital leader that sits within the operations community, and his responsibility is to ensure that end-to-end connection. So at no point in time do we miss the opportunity to leverage or integrate digital into our thinking, particularly because we know that the transformation in this space is going so quickly, and if we don't have the focus, we're going to miss the ball. So.
a lot of food for thought.
Sorry,
Thank
and that
you so
was
much.
really...
No, it's very
The speed
good.
of my speech was probably rather quick, because I want to leave
I
time
think
for my
it's,
partner here.
A lot of gold nuggets. Let me just pick out a couple that very much resonate. I think the role that you're mentioning is important inside the organization and across the organization. Someone that translates between different roles and sectors and responsibility seems to be very important, because we do speak different languages: sustainability, technology, measurement, reporting, whatever. I think we need these people that are much more at the intersections, and I think we have so far overlooked that role quite significantly. We have a lot of experts, but we need much more of this translation, and maybe we need to become much more of these translators ourselves. I also like to highlight maybe one tension that I saw when what you're reporting. You said we need to become more holistically, right? Which at the same time you equated a bit with more specific, right? Industry specific, and at the same time, let's not overcomplicate. And I think this is oftentimes the tension that we're seeing, right? If we're trying to account for nature, truly account for nature, it's always difficult, this trade-off. I think it's just a tension that I see where we want to stay true to what we're doing, and at the same time, we want to not overcomplicate it. But even if we just think about 9 planetary boundaries, it's incredibly complex, right? So. And you also gave us some seeds for hope when you were saying actually most companies, and I just want to back that. Most companies are staying course, but they talk less about it. And this is why we were prompted to write an article which we called Quiet Corporate Activism, which was like, what if you cannot talk about it? And is it even that bad, right? Because we're coming from a period where everybody was shouting very loudly, and you couldn't really see action to follow, to a period where everybody's very quiet, but actually you see action. And now finally it gets more integrated into operations and how things are done, processes, core businesses. So thank you so much. I think there was a lot of bits and pieces that are very, very important here. Thank you. Sonia.
First of all, I have to thank you for this incredible challenge. These were 2 very inspiring tables, and I will surely not do them justice. And I found it utterly inappropriate to finish after 20 minutes. So coming back to, yes, we need to simplify, and we need to keep in mind who's our audience, who are the stakeholders we're talking with, and that starts with our headline, the battle cry, putting nature on the balance sheet. No, it's not about adding another line item on the balance sheet. It's more about how do we translate this into real business value that resonates with investors, that resonates with our risk officers, that we really can in a simple way integrate into our understanding of our competitive advantage and reduced threats and liabilities. And when we look at this, I also had this no magic wand. Quote was, there is no silver bullet, of course. But what I found surprising was the emphasis on we need to consider reputational capital. So when we read Andre's book, we talk about human capital, we talk about productive capital, we talk about natural capital, social capital. But I found it interesting, there is reputational capital, and that needs to be built over time. So there is a long-term perspective in understanding nature as something we build and that we invest in. Found surprising and interesting and to take along. Although there was some concern that without regulatory requirements, this will hardly be acknowledged by accountants. So where is that regulatory context to account for this long-term investment? And one question that occurred rather to me at that point was, and then there is not only a long-termism, but there's also a collective investment. If we talk about investment in order getting nature on the balance sheet, it's not sufficient to look into my own assets, but the dependencies and the impacts we have with landscapes, which is something that's uncommon to our way of thinking in balance sheets and shareholder value, because we might have positive externalities. So how do we think about positive externalities, less only about internalizing negative ones, but also how do we share our positive externalities? So these were a bit the open questions. And just to summarize, there was one point at the table back there thinking about education. How do we embed planetary boundaries thinking into education? Maybe the impulse is how do we embed planetary boundaries into accounting? if we rethink accounting standards.
Thank you so much. And you will be happy to hear that in our accounting MBA, we actually teach the planetary boundaries. And actually, everyone who has ever seen me has seen the planetary boundaries. So at least I'm trying to hold up that flag. But thank you so much. I think that's very valuable. And one of the interesting points is obviously the discussion is not just do we add a line on the balance sheet, right? But what does it really do to the business? And I think one of the examples I like to give is the bee, which is an interesting actor if you think about it. In most value chains in the global food sector, you have the bee. That actually is a very important actor, but it doesn't show up in your balance sheet. But in China, we now have places where the bee is extinct and where people have to manually pollinate the tree by hand. Now, you're all in Switzerland. Imagine how big that balance sheet would be if people would need to pollinate trees by hand. So I think oftentimes this is the lack of when it doesn't show, and I think this is where it becomes very interesting if I see you.
I got a bee thing for you to remember. Because someone asked me, how much does a jar of honey cost in Germany if you pay the bees minimum wage?
I love that, yeah.
It was 500,000 euro.
Oh.
You will never forget about bees.
A luxury product, a luxury product.
And just to add to your point there, and coming back to your digitization, let's embrace this huge opportunity we have with technology and AI to make these connections, to connect biophysical data to economic data, to make it very tangible and understandable what that means for our future fitness as a business and the prosperity we want to actually protect.
Thank you so much. Let me end this panel by asking each one of you what is on top of your mind when it comes to this topic right now. Where do you maybe are looking for collaborators, or where do you really say, this is what we would need to move the conversation forward? Please don't say regulation. I know we need regulation, but don't say it. So outside regulation, what is it that money? What do we need? Where do you maybe need help? What is really where you say, this is for us next, and this is where we think we need to look at? Whoever wants to go first, because I didn't ask you to prepare this question, so I give some of you a second to think about it.
So a few folks that I met with this morning will be familiar with what I'm about to say, which is that I think in the present moment, there's a lot of headwinds we could focus on, but there are pockets of demand and momentum and what we were referring to as bright spots. And so my invitation that I'm listening for is where are those potential bright spots where you see a real opportunity that you're excited about, and where measuring and setting targets could help. And if that sparks some thought for you, come grab me afterward, please.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, so to me, I would say, I would think about the power of a question. If anybody within the ecosystem comes to an organization and say, where are you in terms of nature? I think that will at least trigger the conversation, and beyond that, that will help the organizations to think about, okay, how can I answer that question, and where do I need to partner? I think the theme this year is also about cooperation, and I do believe that it is by taking an ecosystem, and I'm talking about an organization ecosystem, not just ourselves, but everybody here is represented in the room, and I think if we're able to build bridges, we will be far more powerful, not only in terms of education, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of impact. And that's where I think that's the key thing here. I would definitely call for more contacts, more collaboration, because I do believe in the value of this collective intelligence.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, probably in line with a little bit of the sentiment that was coming out at this end of the line. I think what's top of mind for us and where we're most focused as a company now is really almost narrowing down. So I think we've done a lot of broad assessments of where nature risk is. We've done a lot of here are your hotspots. We've done not enough demonstrating the value realization all the way through, sort of end to end. And I think what we're going to find, as is very typical of these things, is there's almost an 80-20 thing, right? So 20% of the effort focused on areas where you actually have significant nature impact will get you, 80% of the outcomes. And then, so for us, it's a lot around how do you get the detailed information you need to truly assess hotspot risks to manage those effectively and to bring that all the way through to the value create to your supply chain, the value create to your investors, the value create to your consumers. So for us, the main thing we want to do is focus a lot more on getting and proving out those value creation cases, because once you've done that, you know, scale will start to look to replicate, right? You look to scale things that have demonstrated that. So for us, it's a little bit more, what we're really focused on is where do we narrow down on those cases that are going to demonstrate this, and how do you build the full system to do it?
So we're a technology company. Nature is not of the core of what we really do. We're in societal infrastructure, electrification, buildings, train systems, industry. However, I would like to find a way to change the narrative, and I'm looking for other nature opportunities to scale business cases. I'm currently trying to figure out if there's not a way to scale business cases connecting to glaciers and drawing attention to that nature infrastructure that glaciers are providing to so billions of people out there, to help rephrase the narrative and find a different way. We're talking about value on the balance sheet. It's value to humanity. How can we make this transparent? And Siemens Technology is very happy to help. And we're looking for things that scale, because we believe philanthropy is fantastic, charity is fantastic. Really changing things, we need to find ways that scale.
So from a Nestle's perspective, as the leading food and beverage company and the largest one in the world, we're really focused on regenerative agriculture. Realizing food systems, we're very heavy buyers of dairy, coffee, and cocoa. And so regenerative practices is truly our focus. We know and fully believe that is the unlock to drive better farmer outcomes, which means better living wages. We know that when you have regenerative agricultures, and I said this at all of our tables, that you have healthier soils, which means you have better products, and then you have crops that are more climate resistant than others. So that's really our focus area, and linked to that is youth agripreneurship. When you think about farmers, growing up in a family that had many farmers, there aren't a lot of my cousins that want to go into farming. So how do you, just like from an operations perspective, we want to bring the sexy back to manufacturing. How do we do that in farming? Because there's a lot of science and a lot of passion that goes into farming, and we strongly believe that the play for us as the world's largest food company is regenerative agriculture.
Oh, sorry. No worries. Yeah, and for us as the land banking group, our focus is on how can we support decision makers to find the business case in nature for their specific business and how to scale this. And one thing that's top of mind for this specific week is that we want to get away from the delusion. It's a lack of data that keeps me from taking those decisions. So we are going to share with the community here as an open source and open data, the Ecosystem Integrity Index, which is not from us. We just coded it. It's the UNWCMC peer-reviewed approach of understanding biodiversity. And we hope we can, catalyze a bit the step up on really taking decisions for more biodiversity in your business decisions for your future fitness and the future fitness of your specific business case.
Thank you so much. Can I just note that we had a very positive panel. We didn't talk about bottlenecks and what is holding us back, but we talked about actual solutions. And I think this was really our primary objective with the session, was to say, let's make it less abstract. Let's talk about what businesses are already doing, how they're already advancing the agenda. And we were extremely, extremely lucky to get such a high-level fire starter panel and panelists starter us that really, really showed us leaders that are already seeing nature as a business case, something that we can actually work upon, something that does make business sense, to really change the conversation from purely a risk towards risk and opportunity. I think we need to acknowledge that there is a real risk element, but there's also an opportunity element. And I think you really brought that to life. Thank you so very much. And we have a little thank you for you. Aurélie will come here. with obviously in Switzerland you get high-level chocolate.
I do hope it's Kaye.
And big hand of applause for taking the time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll let you take your place. Thank you so much. And I would like to ask my co-host, Thomas, on stage one more time. Maybe if we can just stay for 3 more minutes, because I think what is important to us is that this is not a single-off event, but rather the start of something. Please, we're not done. But this is really just the start of something where we can come together. Can I get your attention one more time, please? Thank you. That we will have further opportunities to engage and make this topic actually real. And Thomas, I'll let you finish off with some reflections from your perspective and to also announce what's next.
Thank you, Julia. So just very briefly, 3 things from my side. One is we would love your feedback about today, and there'll be a QR code up in a minute. So if you don't mind just giving feedback, for example, if you'd like it to be a bit warmer next time or something like that, that's where you can say that. Number 2, as you mentioned, you know, an event like this is great, but it's a single event. We want this to be an ongoing conversation. And you shall be receiving an invitation to an event in Basel where we would like to continue on this journey and continue exchanging. So please keep looking out for that. I'm afraid I don't have a date yet, so I can't give you an exact date. It should be this spring. And the third thing, just a big, big thank you. A big thank you to my co-host here for so masterfully taking us through this afternoon. A big thank you to you too for the level of energy that was in this room. That's not a given the temperature, but also the enthusiasm to share and to collaborate on this journey. Thank you for also doing that in your daily jobs. And if I can give you one encouragement, it's go out and take this energy out of this room, and let's keep going on this journey. Let's keep sharing and let's keep moving forward. And we shall not be discouraged by whoever shows up in Davos throughout this week on this journey. It's too important. Thank you.